Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. This is Asadullah Ali of the Andalusian project coming at you today with a special interview with a good friend of mine and fellow at Yaqeen Institute, as well as a fellow librarian, Brother Justin Parrott. And today we're going to be interviewing him regarding his profession as well as the importance of information literacy in the Muslim world. So I just want to welcome you here today, Brother Justin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So, like I said, I was just talking to you earlier about how it's great to talk to you again. Last time I think we met was in Texas a couple of years back. It's great to see you then as well. So it's been a long time since we've had a conversation. It's a long time since I've had a conversation with anyone, actually. So this might be slightly awkward for me. So I'm going to do the best I can to host. But generally, what I brought you on here today because I want to discuss your profession. I want to discuss what you do, what your career is, and why it's important, not only for the Muslim world, but in general. And then I want to kind of go into a discussion about information literacy and why you also feel that to be an essential value in the contemporary period, and maybe even exactly what it is, because I think a lot of Muslims don't even know what that is. And then kind of we can kind of segue into further discussions after that. So we're going to wing it. Okay. But
Okay.
so please tell me everything you can, for example, about what you do. What is your career? What is your particular position? And what do you do in, like, guess, your daily routine, if you could?
Okay, sure. So I started out as I guess I'll go through the little bit of how I got to where I am. So I started out as a teacher, and that's a really difficult job. And as I was going through graduate school, they ended up at the end of the program telling me, well, you can't, you have to teach. Basically, you have to be an assistant teacher for 6 months without pay. And I'm like, I can't do that. Like, I just got married,
Yeah.
like, I'm like, oh my God. So like, what am I gonna do? Like, and then I got this email from an information school in Michigan, which is like one of the top schools, and they were like, "You fit our profile. Come apply to us." So I was like, "Oh, that's great," but then I live in Ohio, so that was very expensive, so I couldn't go there. So I went to Kent State, which is an in-state school. So I got a deal on the tuition, and my wife was a nurse, so she worked while I went through the program, and then I got out of the program. I was in the public library for about a year and a half. I was doing the homework help center coordinator, which was it's a nice little job. It was difficult handling. It was more children, to handle. So, but which is fine. But it was good community. A lot of Muslims that were coming to the library and taking advantage of the program, which was really great.
What was the program about exactly?
So it was an after school program. So from 4 to 7, they could come to the library, they could get pencils, there would be volunteers there who would sit down and do their homework with them, help them use the library, find books, use the computers, they could print, that kind of thing. And so I managed all the volunteers and the children, and my center was the busiest center in the entire Columbus public library system. And so we would get, within 3 hours, we'd have 70 children pass through there on a good night.
So you would say you were assisting in the education of disadvantaged children?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was in a lower income area. A lot of Somali immigrants were coming in, and it was just kind of down near downtown Columbus. So
wow.
Yeah. So anyway, I was there, and it was stressful, but it was rewarding. And I wanted to get my foot in the door with an academic job. And so, I was applying, and it's kind of hard because they usually ask for 2 years experience. And I'm like, how do you hire anybody? We have to have 2 years experience. Like, how do you get in? Like, so anyway, this job came up at New York University in Abu Dhabi, and that's where I work now. And I was hired as a technical services librarian, that's the old term. Now we say it's knowledge management, knowledge access and resource management. That's the new term that New York is using. So basically that would be like, how do you buy the books? How do you catalog the books? How do you make sure the books can be found? And that whole process. And it can get pretty complicated. especially in a big library like New York, and we have 2 satellite campuses, and those are all integrated, and making sure all that data is, according to the standards, and what do you do when you get a book and like it hasn't been cataloged and you don't have anybody to catalog it? Like we get a lot of books. I got books in Kurdish language. I got books in, yeah, we have a very diverse campus. So we get lots of different kinds of books. I had books in Tagalog language. Nobody we know speaks those. Yeah, and so we did. You can pay to outsource that stuff. It's kind of expensive, so you have to figure out a way. How do you make that stuff findable? How do you make it accessible?
So how would you go about actually doing that? I know you can't really show us because I mean I have some idea that you had to involve some programs and some pseudo coding to some degree, right? So how would you explain it to a lay person how you essentially cataloged and process these books?
So we create what is called MARC records, and they all have different fields. So like the author, the title, the publisher, language. What else? Those are the big ones. The ISBN of the book. If it's a DVD, it has a product code, universal product code. Summaries, and then these names and authority, we would call it authority names, like authority fields, I think it's called. But the name has to match the official person's name, and the Library of Congress sets that. So the Library of Congress sets the standards, and then all the books have to be cataloged according to those standards. So the good thing is most of the time we can just copy the record from the Library of Congress. And then if we don't have that, we have to do what is called original cataloging, where you create your own record and it has to hit all these standards, right?
Wow.
And there's 2 different sets of standards that are floating around right now. There's the AACR2 and then there's RDA. Everything's moving into RDA. So don't learn the old one.
Thank God.
If you don't learn the old one. So, that's the basic thing. And then all that has to get into the computer, and it has to get in the back side of the computer, and then it has to go into the front side of the website. So people can look up that book, and then all that information is there. So then that's why you need a systems librarian who makes sure all those pieces are connected, and it can get very complicated.
So essentially, without you and other individuals like yourself in the library, people would not be able to find anything. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't just buy a book and put it on a shelf. Like you have to put it in the system and then make that findable. If you can't find it, it's not even there for that part.
Essentially, it doesn't exist in essence in terms of a library system, right? So have you continued this particular specialty, or have you moved into something else since then?
Yeah, so those are my still primary duties that I do, and I oversee the collection development of the library, and I coordinate with the rest of the librarians, because we all take a piece of the Library of Congress like headings, because there's the call number range, the A, B, C, D, those represent subjects. So we all take pieces of that. Then we get emails. These are the new books that come out. And then, I have them. I'm like, okay, guys, put all of these things into a folder. And then I have a staff of 2 people who purchase these books for us. And, we have purchase options. So ideally you would want to buy a book that comes with the record, that the vendor gives you the record. Then if you can't do that, then you can get another vendor, then you can get a cheap deal, good deal, free shipping. And then if you can't do that, then you got to go to Amazon.
Yeah. And Amazon, of course. So.
Yeah. They get a lot of money from us. And so, but it's the best service for us. We need books quickly. And you have to make sure it's cataloged, and then it's attached to the record in the system. We might already have the record, and you need to attach it to that record, or you need to pull in import a new record and do that. And then if it's for example an Arabic book, I could theoretically catalog it. I know how to do that, but I don't have the time to do that, because it would take like an hour to do one book.
Takes an hour to do
So
one book.
from front to end, well, for me, I'm not, people who do this every day, they get quicker. I don't do it every day. We do copy cataloging most of the time, but
Mm.
I have a friend in New York who is the Arabic cataloger, and he does stuff for me. So I will like scan pages of the book, and I'll say, "This is the book. Can you work on this when you have a chance?" And then he gets it done.
Wow.
So
That sounds actually incredibly complex compared to what people typically think of when they think of a librarian. They think librarians just shelve books and kind of randomly, I guess, organize them in some, arbitrary manner. Um,
yeah.
and so I'm wondering what you think about that general perception of librarians and whether or not there is a lack of appreciation for the field. In other words, basically what I'm asking you is, why do you think librarianship is important and libraries are important, not just in the world in general, but also but for the Muslim world? If you could actually expound on that, that'd be great. So,
Okay, so let's start with in general. Libraries are important because we are living in the information age,
hmm,
and somebody has to organize all this information and make it accessible to people.
hmm,
So whether that's books, whether that's movies, audio clips, audio books, any kind of, like, when you want to give people access to information, you have to have a way to organize it, and there are standards to do that. So and like people don't understand that this is what librarians do. That we're not just shelving books anymore. We're uh, we're organizing data like in computers, and creating websites, and complicated search algorithms, and um, you know, a lot of systems like that.
hmm.
So, I mean, that's why librarians in general are important. But librarians actually, it's a very broad field, and they do a lot of other things than just organize information. And we have like another part of my job is research librarian. So I do
Okay.
research for Middle East studies and Islamic studies. I do religion in general. And I also do research for the law program, or it's a legal studies program. It's not a law, like
Okay.
it's not like a JD program.
Yeah.
It's like a pre-law program. And so I do research for those. I talk to students, I consult with them, I get them books, I buy things that they need. I give them advice on how they might structure their papers. How are you going to arrange your primary and secondary sources? And then I get them all the resources, and I'm like, well, how are you going to go through all this stuff? I'll tell them, well, first you got to go through the secondary sources, get an idea of what you're researching into. Then you can go into the primary sources, and you either agree with what the secondary sources have said, or you say, well, they got this part wrong, or modify whatever framework that you were using to do
Hmm.
research. And so that's kind of the basic process. I teach students how to research, how to use the computer, how to use the databases, what kind of search terms you use, and then when you get an article or when you get a book, you look at the bibliography, and that's full of sources,
Yeah.
and then you go track those down. So if you're researching a paper, like as an undergraduate, if you did 3 or 4 um, really good strategic searches in the database, you would find more than enough sources to complete your paper.
Oh yeah.
Maybe even 2,
Hmm.
if you know like how to use bibliographies and citations and things like that. So that's why libraries are important. Public libraries are very important, especially in low income areas, because they will offer workshops in business, you workshop with your finances, workshop with kind of life skills that you don't get in high school that adults need. These are called adult services librarians in the public library, and so those are really important. Then there's children's services librarians. They do story hour, they do programs, educational things like that. So having those in low income areas is very important, because it gives people the skills, the access, the knowledge to be able to better themselves, and then get a better job and be smarter with their money. And they can use a computer for free, internet for free. If they need, if they don't have a computer at home, they can come to the library, use a computer and internet. So the libraries, I believe, are very important, especially in low income areas, but just about everywhere.
I mean, you're basically
Uh,
saying that information isn't cheap.
Information isn't cheap, and information is part of education, and education is how you move up the ladder. It's how you get. It's like how you. It's social mobility. It's
Hmm,
how people get out of poverty is through education, and
yeah.
so the library plays an important role in facilitating that. Yeah. So that's like librarians in general, and then for Muslims, um, I would say, like we have a lot of books in our um, heritage. There's a lot of books coming out. There's a lot of books, classical books, like source books, like Hadith and stuff like that. Making that all of those things available, and just providing people with the basic information about our religion. Like, how would you know? Like, this is a challenge because, like, people people who are interested in Islam ask me, like, well, I just want to know the basics. Like, just tell me, like, how do you pray and stuff. And like some of the scholarly type people are like, well, according to Imam Shafi, you should do XXXX, and but don't listen to the other guys who
Yeah.
do that. And then it's just like that's way over like a person's head who's just like being introduced to Islam for the first time. So um, anyway, we need to make a way to make information about Islam accessible, and that's why I'm happy to work with the Yaqeen Institute, because we are making that information free. We
Yeah.
have good authors who read complex topics and then kind of boil it down and make it easy for people to understand. So I think Yaqeen Institute is a good uh, initiative that is serving the community, and then we need more things like that. Um, Making open source material more available.
Hmm.
The other thing is, the we have to support Muslim publishing. So I understand why like these books come out and immediately they go online.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
then those publishers they have to get their cut to be able to continue their business. So
Exactly.
I do encourage everybody to go out and buy the books if you can.
So that kind of brings up another point. Unless you
Yeah.
want to finish something, but I just want to kind of bring this up
Okay.
for a little bit as well. Is that how does the internet affect librarianship in general? Is it a negative effect? Is it a positive effect? Is there no effect at all? How do librarians essentially adapt to current internet era? And essentially, like questions like people bring up, well, why do we need libraries when we have the internet now, right? And partly, I think we kind of had the clue was that well, information isn't cheap, right? Even if you have internet, you have to pay for that, right? And you also have to know how to navigate it and find these sources, etc. So I kind of want to look at how the internet affects librarianship, and whether or not librarians are affected by the internet culture, the internet era, and then maybe after that we can segue into information literacy. So
Sure. So, yeah, of course, the internet had a huge impact on the field of library science, and we're not really calling it library science anymore.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
library science, it used to be, it could be the Dewey Decimal System and the card catalog, and in its older days, and when it was not online, everything was on paper.
Mm.
I went to Harvard. They still have their card catalog.
Really?
They never got a chance to put it online. Some
Wow,
of the stuff you have to use a card catalog to look it up.
that's
So
funny. Actually, you have a lot of funding.
yeah,
So
yeah. So it's huge, Harvard. Um, anyway, so the field is changing. So it was library science, and the degree I got is called library and information science. And I think they're gonna just start calling it information science,
hmm,
because it has so much to do with not just libraries. Like, how do you create a website? How do you there's a degree you can get now called information architecture,
yeah, I've heard of
which is
that.
about user design and building websites and things like that. And I was actually going to get a double major, but then I'm like, I don't think I need that. but it was interesting. I took a course or two in that. So now you have very many specialized librarians. You have cataloging librarians, research librarians, instruction librarians, systems librarians, e-resources librarians, online instruction librarians. There's a lot of different places you can go. And then, of course, there's public librarians and all of the things they do, and academic librarians, all the things they do. There are special libraries like museums and like even like someone like a company like the New York Times would have its own library and have its own librarian.
It's amazing.
To organize their archives and stuff. So it has everything has become more technology oriented, and nobody's using the card catalogs anymore. So it did dramatically change the field. Now, why do we still need librarians if we just have the internet? And so this is a good question, and this is something that I have to ask, or I have to tell students about this, because all of our students that we talk to, this is the idea that they have. Well, everything is just on Google. Why can I do that? Well, New York University, where I work, and most big research universities, we pay like over $1 million a year to subscribe to premium databases.
Wow.
And so all of that, yeah, right. And so all of that is like peer-reviewed academic content that is not online, that you cannot find it on Google, right? And so those are the articles written by scholars, reviewed by scholars. They went through a whole scholarly publishing process to create this information. And then because they did that, they want to get paid for that. So they put it behind a paywall.
Of course.
Yeah. So that's why, this stuff, anybody can put anything on the internet. And the internet is not peer reviewed.
Yeah.
Right. So anybody can say anything on the internet, and it can be completely 100% fake news. Like in its most literal sense, fake news, like just completely made up stories. There's a BBC documentary. I think you can look up if you just Google BBC documentary fake news. And it was, they were showing a guy in someplace in Europe, and he was just making false news articles, just outrageous stuff that people would click on. And then he was getting advertising revenue because of that.
God.
So that's the kind of stuff that is put out there on the internet. And I mean, if you use Google and you use other search engines wisely, you can avoid those kinds of things. But if you just take everything that you get off Google at face value, you'll run into big problems. But Google has affected its search algorithm significantly in the last few years, that now they usually will they give the most weight to like journal news media. They give the most weight to news media and like other big established websites. And it's really, really hard to find like kooky conspiracy stuff on the internet, because sometimes I like to read that stuff just because I'm like, wow, people think the earth is flat. Like, why do they believe that? Like,
Exactly.
but Google has gone out of his way to make sure you don't find stuff like that. So you can go to Bing or DuckDuckGo if you really want to find stuff like that.
Or social media in general.
Social media, yeah.
So would you say that librarians still play a role in sort of regulating what we consider to be authentic information in terms of like not just academia, but news and other such things? Like, and do they also play a role in trying to help those algorithms become more accurate, or at least presenting more accurate information?
So the first part of your question, like, I think that librarians play a role in helping people use the tools. I mean, and this is a philosophical discussion that's happening in among librarians right now. It's like, should librarians be neutral? Should librarians be neutral, or should they, be social justice activists or things like that? And my opinion, and is that my job as a librarian is to make the information as accessible as widely as possible. And if I appear if I appear biased, then that ruins my credibility and the credibility of my institution if they think I'm not letting them get free access to the information that they want, and I'm just giving them the information that I want them to have. So that's why I think librarians really need to be neutral, like doctors, or like I guess like doctors, right? Should be neutral, and should help people research something as objectively as possible. Because you can have bad books in the library that are relevant to a research question, but they're not good books, or they're not good books. So when we're collecting items for the library, we look at relevance and quality, right? Is it relevant to the research question of our students and faculty? And is it a quality resource? Well, we have a lot of books that aren't quality resources, but they're relevant to the research question, because you might want to cite from a book that you disagree with, or you might want to have access to this person's views that you disagree with, so that you can refute them in your own article, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So librarians, I believe, need to be there to kind of facilitate research, and facilitate access to as much information that the person needs to answer their research question in a sufficient way. That's what I believe that the research librarian is there for. And I work with faculty. I help faculty get stuff. They ask me questions and want me to give them tips. I've reviewed articles, things like that. So the librarian's there, I believe, to be like a facilitator, right? A facilitator of finding information, and not necessarily somebody who says, well, I'll give you my opinion on things, but my job isn't to tell you my opinion and give you the resources I think you should read. My opinion is to say, well, if you're searching for this topic, these are the search terms you would use. This is the database that you would use. And then when you find these articles, then go out, look in the bibliography to find more articles. And then this is how you would evaluate those sources and things like that. So I give them the tools to be able to do the research themselves, in a neutral way, and not in a way where where I appear biased to them, that I'm hiding information, or I'm not letting them get to the things that they want to answer the question that they're asking.
And I agree with that, the general value that you've presented there. But going back to the philosophical issue, and I think this is where the issue comes into play, especially is with regard to things like fake news, and that really do have a negative impact on real world, events. So, for example, how do you explain that lack of bias when it comes to, for example, instructing on information literacy? Because when we instruct on information literacy, we are in some way saying, well, this is wrong and this is right. So how would you adapt to that, navigate your principle of neutrality within the realm of information literacy, especially when you're doing instructing, right? And while you're at it, if you can explain what information literacy is while you answer that question.
Okay. So I guess let me just start with what information literacy is. So information literacy is a set of skills that you need to be able to find or access and use and share information. So it includes technical skills, like you need to use a computer, you need to learn how to use Google, you need to be able to use these databases. You need to have an awareness of what databases are relevant to the question that you're looking at, and what is the terminology of the field that you're studying. Because every field has its own vocabulary, and if you're researching that field, you should know what scholars are calling different things. Then I think the part that you're talking about is you want to evaluate the credibility of a source, right? Yeah. So, I mean, we've seen, if you come across fake news, you would say, okay, has anybody else confirmed this story? And then you see nobody else has confirmed that story, or somebody's debunked it. And then you can say, oh, that's fake news. That's a fake site. That's not a credible source. Don't use it, you know, that kind of thing. So what I meant by not being biased is not having a political or ideological bias towards the patron that I'm serving, you know, like for example, you know, there's some political hot button political issue, and I have very strongly feel that, you know, we should vote X on this bill or whatever. And this person, I think, probably wants to vote Y on that bill. But I'm going to be like, okay, if you're researching this bill, I will give you everything you need to research this bill, and you make up your own opinion. And that's my job as a librarian, to facilitate that. I'm not going to say, oh, only read these books, or like, you know, and there's some librarians who do think that way. And I think that's not
appropriate.
That's not going to be good for the field if we all go that way. So this issue of credibility is a big piece of it, because you know, this is called in the field information authority. That's when I was in grad school, that's what they call it, information authority. But it's about credibility, you know, quality, what are the qualifications, and, you know, so, you know, you should, if you're interested in a particular field, you want to know who are the leading scholars of that field, what are the leading institutions of that field, you know, and you obviously identify those people. And then, as in most fields, there are disagreeing opinions, and you will say, oh, okay, well, there's a group of scholars that have a different view, and they then separate themselves into schools of thought, like madhab, we have madhabs, right? So in every field, there's madhab, right? There's a madhab for these particular views, right? So you want to, when you're going researching a field, you would want to identify the schools of thought and who are the leading scholars of those particular schools of thought, who are they making the leading arguments. And then you would have to read both sides, and then you give your opinion. You do your research, and then you give your opinion, and that's how knowledge is created. Is because you enter. So you enter into this dialogue between the scholars, and then you give your perspective, and you might be able to add to that conversation. And then this is the process through which fields develop and knowledge is created for consumption of the public. This term, or this concept in the American Library Association framework for information literacy is called scholarship as a conversation. So think of scholarship as a conversation. It's not just an independent person just reading books and then writing on his own. Scholars are always responding to somebody else, right? And they're always building off the work of somebody else. And I have a great example from our Islamic tradition to mention this point. So Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy on him, be pleased with him. He wrote a book called Risala, right? Which is the epistle. It was just called the epistle, but this was one of the biggest works on usul al-fiqh in our history, right? So what he does in this book is that he basically lays the groundwork for what would become the field of usul al-fiqh, right? So all the main topics, he kind of laid them out, and he gave his opinion. And then my understanding is that the Hanafis didn't really agree, and so then they responded, right? And then there were other people who agreed, and then they responded. And then that went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then that's how the field of usul al-fiqh developed. And now, today, I haven't seen really anybody cite the Risala of Imam Shafi'i, because the field has developed so much that there are much better, more refined works that are out there now, that we don't need to go back to that original work. But it has this incredible historical value, seeing as how it was so influential in the field, right?
Yeah.
So everybody, he wrote that book, and then every scholar of this field after him was responding to him, right? So so that's how the scholarship was created, but through this dialogue of scholars, right? And then fields were developed. So whenever you're researching a field, you want to look at both sides. There might be three sides, and identify who are the leaders of those things, the leaders of those fields. And then when you become proficient enough in that field, then you can, read all those guys or women, men and women, scholars who wrote on the topic, and then you evaluate their arguments, and then you give your own opinion, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody will respond to you, and then the process keeps going, and then that's how scholarship develops.
I think this is, and I agree with your assessment there. And this is generally the structure of what we consider to be credible, or at least academic information, academic knowledge. The issue that I think is problematic, though, with respect to information literacy, is that, especially in contemporary period, you have a lot of individuals who have rejected the entire structure. Like, like we brought up flat earthers earlier, right? Like, how do you deal with people with that mentality that completely reject all scholarship, all forms of academic data? And, another good example too is that you see this even among many Muslim youth, right? From both the what you want to call the far right, even the far left, the progressive Muslims versus even the so-called conservative types, right? That the rejection of scholarship is a very popular thing. Credentials no longer matter. Oh, this person has an ijazah, it doesn't matter. My opinion matters, because of the way I read the Quran, or the way, or because I read Joe Schmo's blog and I was convinced by his argument, therefore all of these scholars are wrong. How do you deal with that mentality?
That's a big, huge question.
Yeah, sorry.
So, what you have identified is a credibility crisis, and this is affecting everybody. It's not just Muslims. So we have, medicine has taken a big hit of credibility. Government was never always not very credible anyway, but that's in the tank now.
Yeah.
The news media, it doesn't have very much credibility anymore to be non-biased. I mean, a lot of people don't trust, whatever. They don't trust Fox News. They don't trust CNN, or, that's a big problem. So that credibility crisis is affecting almost all areas of expertise. And it's because, to be honest, people who had credibility, who were authorities, have been revealed to be dishonest, or there's been different scandals. There's been scandals in academia. There's little by little, the credibility gets chipped away. So it's really, really difficult to rebuild that trust when it's been damaged so much. Like, for example, the New York Times now used to be the paper of record, and now people have a lot of people have a very bad view of it and don't trust it to report honestly or without bias. So and the Muslim community, this is a symptom. I think, and part of this is because of the internet, that before, when experts were lying to us, we wouldn't know that they lied to us, and so we just went along with it. And now, like, anybody can be challenged, and anybody can be refuted easily. And so the internet is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it has exposed people that have abused their power and credibility, but it's also then just damaged the authority and credibility of people who should be credible, who should remain credible.
So do you think also that the general population has, I mean, so I agree with you that there are many examples of dishonesty and lacking academic integrity within academia itself, right? We've seen it, we've experienced it ourselves, I think, as well. I think you could probably tell me some personal stories. I have some of my own, being mistreated in many respects. But don't you think also that maybe the general population, because maybe due to a lack of a certain aspect of education, have sort of like taken these examples, right, and sort of universalize them across the board?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and there are some people out there who are already wanted to attack the credibility of academia or the liberal media or whatever. And so, like, but the thing is, it only takes a couple of scandals for
Mhm.
people to just start tuning out.
Yeah.
Like, well, CNN has, botched the story. That's the third time now. I'm never going to listen to anything they say again because of what they, because of this, right? So that's just really hard to rebuild, and it is worrying because it's making my field more difficult
Hmm.
because information literacy does rest on this idea that there are credible sources in contrast and distinction to non-credible sources.
Yeah.
And you literally have to be able to identify the credible sources. And when credibility is being eroded, then it makes it a lot more difficult to navigate the information landscape. So,
Mhm.
and I'll make a point here about the news, like, and also it's because things are moving so fast. Like, there's so many stories that are going out every day. There's so many different things to pay attention to that I believe it's not possible to, like, know everything, like
Yeah.
to be literate on everything that is happening in the media right now. You're going to have to rely on somebody else's analysis and somebody else's, like, report. And so I follow, like, various journalists, different ideological biases they have, and they're doing combat on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Every day they're just, like, doing political combat on Twitter and everything like that. And almost all of them always at some point repeat a news story that was debunked or that was changed. The facts came out, but then the facts weren't correct, and they had new facts and everything like that. And they're just dealing with so much information
Hmm.
that they're going to make mistakes like that,
Yeah.
because you just can't go back and fact check everything yourself. You have to depend on fact checkers, and on some of the fact checkers aren't very good, to be honest.
So you've kind of
So,
presented this very doom and gloom
yeah.
reality. I mean, I didn't think you did it intentionally, but so I'm wondering, is there a ray of hope at the end of the tunnel? I mean, what's the point, for example, of teaching information literacy if all of these things are happening around us? Is it salvageable? Is there something that we can still trust and look forward to?
Oh yeah, it's still salvageable. Salvageable. It
Yeah,
is. It
yeah.
is.
So,
And it is still very important. And I'm not trying to say that it's not important. I'm just saying it's becoming more difficult.
hmm,
So, to go with this idea of credibility in the way you evaluate a resource is also you evaluate the bias of the resource,
hmm,
right? And this is really important, because if you're looking at a particular scholar in a field, you'll see they have a particular viewpoint, and they have their own confirmation bias, so they're more likely to accept things that already agree with their thesis and reject others. And that's a human, like, tendency, right?
hmm,
And we can't totally get rid of all that bias. Like, we can't be totally objective. We all have a bias. So when you're evaluating a resource, you need to think about what is the credibility, what is the bias of that affects their credibility.
hmm.
And I'll give you an example, easy example that we all know about. So, like, the CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, they all have a left-wing bias,
Yeah.
right? And then you have Fox News and Washington,
Post?
no, not Washington Journal,
The Washington Post?
Washington Times,
The Times. Okay.
and Wall Street Journal. I'm talking about Wall Street Journal.
Oh, Wall
They
Street.
kind of have a right-wing bias, right? And then you have all these little kind of independent media companies that are popping up now. You have, like, Vox and Slate and Salon, and those are, like, left-wing, like, independent media, well, smaller companies. And then you have on the right, you have like Daily Wire, Daily Caller, Daily Signal, Red State. You have these little like Town Hall. These are all like these conservative right-wing media companies. So when you're using any of those as a source of information, and I'm not saying that they are lying all the time, but I'm saying when you read an article from the New York Times, they have a particular bias that you have to keep in mind, right? And the same thing with the Wall Street Journal, same thing with Fox News and CNN. So we can't just say, oh, well, they're all biased. We can't rely on any of them. But when you can use them, right? And they for the most part, their normal reporting is fine. It's when you get into opinion journalism that when the line between opinion and journalism is blurred, like with like Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow, that's where they lose all their credibility. It's because of that. It's not really because of the hard reporting that they do. So that's a whole thing. So in scholarship, it's kind of the same way. So I'll give you an example. Bernard Lewis, right, in Islam in Islamic studies. So he was like a old school Orientalist, and he had his thesis about what went wrong in the Muslim world, and I don't even remember, actually. It's been such a long time, but he had a particular view, right? And then he locked heads with Edward Said, right, who wrote Orientalism, and then really changed the direction of the field, because they kind of started going away from the old school Orientalism, and it was more towards being critical of the Western study of the East, right, because of Edward Said. So those were like two schools of thought in Middle Eastern studies, and represented by these two particular scholars, right?
Yeah.
So that's another example too. And I'm not saying like, and this is funny, when I got here, my boss, like, she really did not like Bernard Lewis, right? No. And I understand that, right? Because he kind of has a bias against the Muslim world. And we were talking, and we're building this library from scratch, and I'm like, yeah, we should probably have all his books. And she was like, oh, I can't stand him, whatever. I'm like, yeah, but he's the professor emeritus at Princeton. Like, we have to have his books. Like, like he's part of the machine. Like, maybe we should have his books, because our people are going to want to read it and refute it. Yeah. Right. He's not like a crackpot. Like, I totally disagree with him, and things like that. So we we got his books as well. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't read Bernard Lewis. Like, if you do read Bernard Lewis, be aware of the criticisms of him, and be aware of the bias that he's coming from. Okay. And to be fair to Bernard Lewis, he said that there is absolutely no justification for terrorism in Islamic law at all. He said that, right? And he's been very critical of the Muslim world, but he, as a scholar, acknowledged that point. You have a lot of other crackpots out there who are saying this terrorism is completely in line with Islamic law, but he knew
Robert Spencer.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I use when people bring that up, I'm saying, well, Bernard Lewis is not really a friend of the Muslim world, but he said this, right? And he is a scholar at Princeton, so it can be useful. His works can be useful, but you got to put them in context, Yeah. And so understanding his bias, and same thing with Edward Said as well. Like, he was biased, right? Yeah. In the other way. And you look at the criticisms of him. Like, I think a lot of that criticism of him is pretty fair. Like, he did kind of overstate his case, which is what you want to do if you want to make a name in academia. You kind of make a wild like argument, like, and you kind of be a little hyperbolic about it. And so it worked for him, made him famous. So I wouldn't say that you would just accept everything that he says either, even though I tend to agree with him more than Bernard Lewis, right? But because he had his own bias as well.
Yeah.
So so it's basically what we're dealing with in terms of information literacy is dealing with the credibility crisis, and the way we have to navigate that is to be more sensitive to the biases of our sources, right? And always look up the counter arguments, right? Because in the science, like, for example, let's look at climate change. My understanding, and I'm not an expert on this, most scientists agree there's man-made climate change, right? Yeah, most scientists agree, right? There's some scientists that don't, right? So, okay, listen to what they say. If they're wrong, show that it's wrong. If they have a point, maybe we need to go back and fix our model, right? But there has to be this exchange of ideas, and bad ideas need to be heard so that good ideas can respond to them, right?
Yes, I agree. So if I may be so bold to ask, do you think that Muslims, everyone in general, should be required to learn information literacy? And in fact, would you say, because we're going to bring this up soon, as well as your article, I want you to kind of plug that from Yaqeen Institute. You wrote an article for Yaqeen Institute regarding information literacy. Do you believe that this is an obligation upon Muslims, even like a religious duty, perhaps, that, for the sake of integrity, for the sake of truth, that they should be information literate?
I'm not going to give a fatwa.
No fatwas here.
Yeah. But I would say it makes sense to me to say that information literacy is fard al-kifaya, right? It's a collective obligation, in that we say medicine is a collective obligation. El-Ghazali said that, right? Mathematics is an obligation. Those are the two big ones, right? But there are other fields now that, we need to have those people, right? And every field is touched by information literacy. Like every field is enriched by information literacy. So yes, I do think collectively we need to do that. And I'm not making a fatwa about it. I'm just saying I think we should do that. And I think especially anybody who is active on social media and is active in researching on the internet needs to be aware of these kind of basic principles. Because on social media, for example, where people get into trouble is because they see something and people post stuff to give you an immediate emotional reaction. And that's the way the platforms have been constructed. So, you see, this terrible news article, and I'm going to click and I'm sharing, I'm going to comment, and that's what they say. Yeah. They want you to be on the platform as much as possible, and rage is one way to keep you on there. And so the tendency is people just kind of read the headlines and they don't really read the article, and then they just kind of get mad and share it and nasty comment about it. But the thing is, life should be slower than the way that people are living it on the internet. Like, you need to, if you're going to comment on an article, you should at least read the article. If you want to comment smartly on the article, read another article from another source that has a different perspective, right? So I wrote a little blog post recently about the $15 minimum wage issue. And I think that's really, really sad, the way that this debate is playing out. because I think most people would agree that everyone deserves a living wage, especially if you work full time,
Yeah.
right? That's absolutely 100% true. And we need to do something in the government to make sure that that happens. Like, nobody should have to work more than 40 hours to pay their rent and pay for their food and get their car payment and all that kind of stuff, right? Take care of their kids and everything. The problem is, the debate is constructed in a way that doesn't really allow debate. So you have
Mm.
people that are like, if you're against the 15 minimum dollar wage, you're a terrible person. Like, you're just bad person. Like, that's not like a policy debate. Like, that's
Yeah.
not debating the efficacy of the policy. It's just, you're making a moral, emotional argument. Some people are like that, make that argument. And on the other hand, the Congressional Budget Office, which is supposed to be bipartisan, they said in their report that, okay, this is going to lift 900,000 people out of poverty. Okay, that's
Mm.
good. But then 1.4 million people are going to be pushed out of the workforce
Huh.
because people are just going to hire less. I
Mm.
mean, if you're working at McDonald's and you can hire 2 teenagers at $7.50 an hour, well, now you have to hire one person at $15 an hour,
Mm.
and then the other person just doesn't get a job,
Mm.
right? And so you can make the argument that, like, okay, the intention behind that is good, but it might like lead to unintended consequences in the market like that. And then what about the fact that the companies that are really going to get hit by that are the small businesses, because now they're going to have to hire at a higher rate.
Yeah.
It means they're going to have less workers. They're not going to be able to compete with the big guys. And then the big guys are just going to automate. Like, they're just going to make more kiosks in McDonald's and kiosks at your Kroger's or your whatever grocery store you go to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so what depresses me about this particular issue is that this is a debate that we should be having. We should be talking about the efficacy of the policy, because
Mm.
most people want to lift the poor out of poverty. I
Yeah.
don't believe that there's people sitting around and it's, I just, let's let them rot in poverty. I mean, I don't think people are like that. I think most people want to lift people out of poverty, but the small business owners are nervous that this is going to tank their business, and that debate, we were supposed to be in Congress and we would debate these things, and we would have scholars come and they would talk and do like that, and then we would have a compromise. We'd have to get 60 votes out of the Senate to get a majority, a bipartisan majority, and it's just not working like that.
Yeah.
Because of the way social media has affected the discourse, I guess.
Mm.
So
It's more about like sound bites and emotional appeals than anything else.
yeah.
Do you think that's also, I mean, not just in politics, but do you think that's also affected the Dawah scene, the way that Muslims are interacting online?
I'm not pleased about a lot of the online Dawah stuff, because there's a lot of reputation stuff
Mm.
that probably shouldn't be going on.
Mm.
And I'll just say, you can read El Ghazali's Book of Knowledge. This is translated into English.
Mm.
And he is very harsh towards the scholars in his period, who they did all kinds of debates. They would debate all kinds of things, and then the spiritual danger of indulging in these debates is very threatening to your soul. because when you are in a debate, you're kind of like, you want to win. Like, you don't necessarily want to get to the truth, right? Imam Shafi'i, may Allah be pleased with him, he was great because he said, you know, I never debated anybody, but I didn't care if I said the truth or they said the truth. I'm paraphrasing here, right? And he said, you should look at the person you're debating as a partner, that you are partnering with them in finding the truth. Your goal isn't to defeat them. It isn't to humiliate them. It isn't to harm them in any way. It's like you want to persuade them to the truth, or maybe they have a point, and then that's going to change your opinion on some kind of issue. And that's how you need to debate. So he that's how you need to debate and discuss as Muslim, right? So he actually lays down a lot of conditions that you should have before you engage in these types of debates, and nobody does that online, you know. And I'm just like, I can't look at it. I don't look at it I don't look at my Twitter feed. I actually have a private Twitter where I follow just a few pages and news and stuff. But like the general Muslim Twitter, I just like.
I got off Twitter a long time ago. I just couldn't take the lack of integrity and lack of sincerity that was occurring on there, and just even in general, even on Facebook, it's bad too. But alhamdulillah, I think Facebook is a little bit more regulated in many respects, so it's a lot easier to kind of avoid those things or to engage more honestly, because you have actually it's Facebook provides more options for you to present a case, right? Because when you have Twitter, it's like you have to make a thread because and it's like you can only write a couple of characters, so you have to be as concise as humanly possible. And most of the time, it's being that concise is always going to be room for error, right? And so a lot of these young Muslims, especially, they sort of adopt this idea that like one sentence refutations. So I mean, we could probably talk about that the entire for another 2 hours. So I don't want to get into all that drama, but yeah, it's very depressing, and it's sort of, for me, it's degrading not only the reputations of fellow Muslims, but it's also degrading our understanding of what it means to be knowledgeable, to be to have integrity, to be honest, to I mean, all benefit of the doubt. I mean, when I see all these refutations online, for me, it's like it's not even just by the standards of information literacy or even the standards of Western legal system, but even the standards of the Sharia. It's like what it counts as evidence on social media is like completely against Quran and Sunnah.
No, I mean, a lot of the people doing these debates aren't really trained, and they're bringing up old scholarly like disagreements that have been around for hundreds of years, maybe more than 1,000 years. Sometimes you're not going to solve it on Twitter, and especially Twitter is not. It's not constructed to change people's minds. Like, at least on Facebook, you can kind of have an extended discussion, and I have had positive like interactions with people on Facebook, but on Twitter, because of the character limitation, and because of the way that you can retweet and dunk on people, it's just not a good platform for discussion. I mean, I only post to Twitter, and then somebody might ask me a question, I'll answer a question, but you just don't discuss anything with people on Twitter. It's just almost never, especially if like, it's a controversial thing. You just never change anybody's minds, on that. But anyway, you were saying?
No, I mean, that's essentially what I wanted to say. I don't want to get into any specifics or anything, but yeah. So the next thing I want to ask, and I think we've gone over most of this stuff already, but so you wrote a paper for Yaqeen Institute regarding information literacy, and I just want you to give a brief summary of it, tell us what it's about, and then inshallah we can advertise it after the interview to the rest of the audience. So
sure. So basically, what this paper is about was I was making parallels between the modern day ALA's framework for information literacy, and then how this relates to concepts in our tradition. So for example, the Hadith is a very good example. So the scholars came up with a very elaborate system to be able to authenticate and grade Hadith, because they wanted to make sure this is really what the Prophet ﷺ said, or he likely said this, or he maybe didn't say that, or this is completely fabricated, right? And so we wouldn't just take our religion, the Hadith, which is a source of law, it's a source of Sharia, right? You can't just take it off of some hearsay, somebody said that, you know. And Islam is very evidence-based. You know, it's evidence-based in the sense that our aqidah, our beliefs, our fiqh, our practice, all of that has to have evidence in the Quran and Sunnah. And if not, it has to be based on the ijtihad, or the personal reasoning of a scholar who is an expert on the Quran and Sunnah, right? So, and credibility. I get into credibility as well. You know, like if you want to learn Islam, you have to know who the scholars are, and preferably you have a living teacher whose piety that you trust, whose character that you trust, and whose knowledge that you trust. And they don't have to be famous. You know, there's so many great scholars out there that are not famous, and they're not online, but you can learn a lot of them in the local masjid, right? So I was bringing sort of the parallels between Islam and then some of the usul al-fiqh, some of the legal principles that we have directly are correlated to these concepts of information literacy. And then I wanted to mention this hadith when I was talking about sharing stuff on social media, because the platforms are set up, like I said, for you to see something, react instantly, viscerally, and then share it, and that's how stuff goes viral. There's a hadith the Prophet ﷺ said, this is Sahih Muslim near the beginning, which was important for Imam Muslim. And he says, I'm paraphrasing, that it is enough falsehood for somebody to repeat everything that they hear.
Yes.
Right? It's enough falsehood for someone to repeat everything that they hear. So it's enough sin to ruin you if you just take stuff at face value and share it, right? And we have to be careful, because the social media platforms are constructed to do just that, right? They want you to see something and share it immediately. Share the article because you read the headline without actually reading the article to see what it said or if it's even fair, right? So that's something that we all have to watch out about, myself included, all of us, that we're really careful about what we're sharing on social media, and you know, that if we want to say something, we really need to kind of vet it, and we kind of need to research it, or at least find somebody who is credible that we trust, who has said that, and we can take the lead from that person, preferably a scholar, right? So that's the gist of the article. Okay. And I gave the example of Imam Shafi'i, I think, that you mentioned before. I also mentioned a little bit about research methodology, like if you're completely new to a field, how do you get into the field? And I talk about that, like, this is how you would learn fiqh, right? Yeah. If you're learning a madhab of fiqh, if you want to learn the Shafi'i madhab, for example, you would start with the primers, right? The primers are the texts where they just give you the rule. They don't give you the hadith or the justification or anything. They just say, this is the rule. These are the rules, right? So now you know enough to practice. And then you get more advanced texts where it's like, this is the rulings of the Shafi'i school, and this is the evidence that they're based upon. And then there's disagreements within the Shafi'i school, and these are their evidences and everything like that. So you get kind of more exposed to that. And then you have these really large works like Al-Majmu' by Imam al-Nawawi, or Al-Mughni by Ibn Qudama for the Hanbali madhab, where they go very exhaustively deep into all of these different issues, and then they mention what the four schools have said about that and their evidences, right? Yeah. So that's like very advanced like book of fiqh, and you would study. And if you were going to be an expert with fiqh, you would go from the primers, then to the intermediate texts, and then to these advanced texts. And you would do that with one madhab, right? So then you would become an expert of the Shafi'i madhab, and then you would look at the other schools.
Yeah.
And when you were competent and proficient in knowing all of the schools, then you could be a mujtahid, right?
Which
So
would
a lot of
forever.
knowledge, right?
Yeah.
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 So that was like, yeah.
So what is the title of your article? Been a
Uh,
while. I know it's been a while since you wrote it. So I just,
and then they re-released it and changed the title.
they changed the
The
title.
original title, yeah, the original title was, I think, Finding the Truth in the Age of Misinformation.
Yeah.
Islam.
I remember. Okay.
And then I forget what the second title was. It was the exact same article. They just wanted to re-release it, I guess.
Yeah.
It had something about fake news in the title.
Okay.
So.
Now I'll plug it in the information box, so don't worry. But so
Yeah.
I encourage everyone to go read that article immediately after this this interview. So all right then. Well, I think that we have exhausted our time, but I want to thank you so much for coming on here and taking the time to have this interview, especially from the other side of the world, where you currently are in Abu Dhabi. It's been an amazing discussion. I'm always interested in these subjects as well, and I really feel like these sort of topics need to be discussed more, especially among the Muslims, because we have a rich heritage of information literacy, even in our history, that needs to be explained and taught more. And I think this is something that is deeply missing from contemporary culture in general. So inshallah, hopefully in the near future, we can have these sort of discussions again, maybe talk about something more specific. But in the meantime, I just want to, say thank you so much, Jazakallahu khairan, for coming here. And if you have any last thoughts, please share it with the audience. We'd like to hear that. So
last thoughts. Okay. I'm always going to plug this because I think I have to plug it every single time.
All right.
Okay.
Please do.
If you want to debate somebody and you want to discuss with somebody, you should love for them what you love for yourself. Okay. And that's how you win a debate. And that's why Imam Shafi'i said he never debated anybody, and he wanted to see them humiliated. Right. And he is the best example of somebody who debated, right? Because his intention was so pure and he was so humble. He didn't care about getting credit or getting fame, even though he would become famous. He didn't care about any of that. He just wanted to get to the truth, and he wanted to benefit the person that he was debating. He didn't want to humiliate them. He didn't do it for his nafs or his ego, and I think that really boils down to when you're going to refute somebody and when you're going to debate somebody, you should keep in mind that you should love for them what you love for yourself, and think, if I was that person, how would I want somebody to change my mind? How would I want them to be towards me to change my mind?
I think that's great advice. Inshallah, I hope everyone is taking that to heart. So thank you again so much, Brother Justin.
I have to mention that every time. I run that into I try to connect that to everything. I think it's such an important principle in Islam. So
I agree with you. And inshallah, hopefully we can start implementing that as a normative principle instead of a rarity. So thank you so much. Thank you again for coming on here. And inshallah, I hope to speak with you again soon. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Take care. All right. So I think we're done. You know what, Brother Justin? That was an excellent discussion. Primarily because of you, obviously.
Great. I had a good time. Thank you.
Awesome.
So much.
No, I think that it was extremely beneficial. Are we still recording? How do I stop this? I'm really bad with technology. See, this is why I need more information literacy myself.